Hey, Rick Usher here with the City of Kansas City, Missouri, along with Bo McCall with our Data KC office. We have been operating a remote work program for city government employees since mid-March and wanted to make this presentation during Digital Inclusion Week to talk about how our employees across the city, 4,400 employees, and we'll go through the number of employees that have been able to work from home and steps the city's taken with technology to make that experience positive and productive for us to keep government services ongoing, as well as the internet services in the city that our employees have been able to access. And so Bo has done a lot of work on surveying, and introduce him now to run through these slides and give us some information.
Good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're watching this. My name is Bo McCall. I am with Data KC, and I'm going to be presenting a little bit today on internet access at home. We're going to be looking at this through the lens of KCMO residents with some of our resident satisfaction survey data, and then also looking at some of the impacts for our local government workforce this year through a new emergency teleworking program, some of the insights we've had through surveying our employees there. First, we'll start off looking at some of the insights around KCMO residents in 2020. Just looking at kind of a current state of where we're at here. When we look at teleworking with Kansas City, Missouri residents, this is from a survey by ETC, our resident satisfaction survey administrator, from July. And this is a local COVID-19 survey where they asked people about their behaviors. And you can see that in July, there was a slight decrease in the number of residents at the time, 37%. That was July was around the time that the economy was starting to open up more locally. Businesses were starting to open up as well. So not really a big surprise there, but around 37%. Again, these are from mid-July, so we could expect some movements between July and now. Looking at some of the national surveying on working from home, that's also nationally around 37% of people are working from home when you look at it across the country. And then locally, looking at some of the school districts' fall 2020 plans around the Kansas City Metro, there are so out of the 6 counties, you can see the breakdown here where you have 100% back in school, 100% virtual, and then that hybrid learning. Based on where the situation is currently, we're looking at almost 80% of districts have either virtual or hybrid learning. So 80% of districts have that digital learning, at least part-time. So that's a choice that parents are having to make. Employers are having to work with their employees as well, due to parents being at home more with their kids or having to make accommodations for their kids, having to find childcare. And then I'll go over some of the results from our resident satisfaction survey on a question about internet access. We asked a question, is internet access at home? And we've been asking this question since, I believe, 2015. We have seen increases in that time. So we've seen it, small increases, but over time it's risen from 83 to 86%. I will say in Q1 of this fiscal year, which the survey went out in August, we saw a jump to 91%. So there was a 5% increase in just this past quarter. So it'll be interesting to see over the next, the upcoming quarters, how if that trend continues, if it balances out back to the 86% or towards that. But I guess you'd expect to see that increase with more people working from home, more students working from home as well, accessing the digital or the virtual learning. And then over that 5 period time, so seeing that increase, most of that increase has been attributed to groups levels of access driving that increase. So the groups in 2015 that already had a high level of access that number really hasn't statistically changed, whereas those groups with lower levels of access have been steadily increasing. Although there are significant disparities still in internet access by socioeconomic group in the city. You see the third and fifth districts are lowest household income groups. They're also, I'll present these results going forward, but significant disparity there between lowest household income and then the highest, and then also with our Black residents and our American Indian residents as well. And even when we control by geography and race, you still see those disparities at play. So looking at regular access to internet by tenure and dwelling type, owners of home, people who reported owning their home, have about a 10% higher regular access to the internet. And then you also see there's a difference between the single family homes and also apartment and condo buildings, about a 5 or 6% difference there. Then looking at the citywide numbers and also by income, you can see that citywide increase between FY16 and FY20. Again, we're at around 91% for this first quarter. Looking across how different income groups have changed over time, you see that over $100,000 household is exactly the same as it was in FY16. You can see the increases slowly over time for the lower income groups there, but still a very noticeable disparity between the under $30,000 household and the $60,000 to $100,000 a year households, around 30%. We also see these disparities when we look at this across different races. Again, looking between the difference between FY16 and FY20, where you see the groups that had higher levels of access in FY16, they haven't really moved a whole lot in FY20. But looking at the groups that had lower levels of access, Black, African American, then our American Indian, Eskimo, we have seen those increases, but we're still looking at around a 20 to 25% gap there in the regular access to the internet. We can also look at this across council districts. And again, you see the disparities there between the third and the fifth and some of the other council districts, like the second, sixth, and fourth. And then when we look at household incomes across the council districts that are over $100,000 annually, we see it's pretty similar, a little bit lower in the third compared to some of the other, but then some definite differences when you look at it in that under $30,000 household range. You still see the similar patterns playing out even when in those under 30,000 based on where the council district is. So definitely some opportunity there for what we as a city can do to figure out better infrastructure, how to connect more people in these council districts to internet services, more frequent services. And then this is looking at the the digital divide through the lens of a local dashboard or a local company that put up a dashboard called My Sidewalk. And essentially it's looking at 3 criteria. It's households without a computer, percent of households without access to the internet, and percent of households below the poverty level. So that's how they created this index. Those areas in the darker blue are going to be the areas with less access, where there's a greater digital divide. And then you can also see the census tracts that are most impacted by that digital divide. So again, a lot of areas of opportunity where the city can be more involved through infrastructure, helping break down some of those barriers and providing residents with more access. And with that, I'll move on to the local government workforce. Rick, was there anything you want to add when talking about residents?
No, I think it's great explanation of this map. And so the census tracts highlighted in yellow, those are areas that we're going to be taking a specific focus on with our Coalition for Digital Inclusion to see what the needs of residents in those neighborhoods are as far as obtaining internet subscriptions and computers at home.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to the KCMO employee part of the presentation, looking at our local government workforce, some of the efforts that have been made in our emergency teleworking program, trying to understand some of the challenges, some of the needs for our employees who are now teleworking more frequently from home. As Rick mentioned, we have about a 4,400 person workforce. And we'll be looking at the teleworking program, internet access, and also some of those virtual learning considerations. You'll see it's very similar to what we saw in the resident section. And another note here, if you're not familiar, KCMO does have a residency requirement. So if you work for the city, you live in the city. So everybody that is represented in these results are all also Kansas City, Missouri residents. So real quick, looking at where we are now from where we started back in March at the beginning of the pandemic. On March 8th of 2020, there was no teleworking policy. There wasn't a lot of organizational support for teleworking. It wasn't something that there was really any type of there was discussion about it, but there was no necessarily roadmap for teleworking or bringing that into the organization. At that time, video chats and conferences were also not something widely practiced. By May 8th, about 3 months after the pandemic started, or 2 months after the pandemic started, there was an emergency teleworking policy in place. We had about 20% of our workforce registered to telework. And really, I would guess it's more probably 20 to 30%, closer to 30% that were actually teleworking. And then we also saw that by that time, video chats had been widely adopted. In early surveys, we saw there was like 25% of employees that when they first started working from home had used Microsoft Teams and Zoom and some of those different tools we're all familiar with now. And by May 8th, it was closer to 75 or 80% had been using these frequently, those tools. And then looking at September 8th last month, we now are in the midst of working on a permanent employee teleworking policy. We have a multi-departmental effort with putting together a more permanent policy or recommending a more permanent policy. We have around 38% of our workforce that's teleworked over half the time since July. And then more virtual tools continue to be adopted by the workforce. Just doing an overview of what the surveying has looked like, some of those milestones here for the teleworking program. March 12th, the mayor declared a state of emergency. By March 16th, the city had stood up an emergency teleworking pilot program. That was something, a program initiative that Rick was leading. And also how I became involved was that first telework survey. Rick was asking about, with this new flow of employees that were working from home for the first time, what types of challenges they had, what types of, was the city able to connect with them communications wise? Did they have the right technology to work from home? And so we first started surveying about technology and communications. As we progressed, we had more interesting questions around the work-life balance, productivity. Once it started to become apparent that the teleworking program was going to be in place, that the pandemic wasn't going to end in the spring, we started asking those questions. And then that puts us up to some of our return to workplace surveys, and the last one being August 7th that we administered. And that one went into that was a citywide survey, and it went out to employees and talked about some of the issues around our workforce returning with PPE, how safe they felt in the workplace, also with telework, and then also with back to school considerations for employees who are parents. So those questions at the outset of the program, will employees be satisfied with teleworking? How productive will they be? What departments can more successfully utilize teleworking? And then do employees have the tools? We're going to hone in for this presentation on that question about employees having the tools and resources. And looking at some of the findings from the different surveys, we do see that about 38% of the workforce is teleworked over half the time since July. Around 47% have not worked at all, have not teleworked at all, that is. They've definitely been working, but not teleworking at all, so they've been working on site. And then we also see that around 88% of teleworkers would prefer to continue teleworking in some form going forward. I think this is indicative that the teleworking program is probably here to stay on some level. Again, we got that teleworking policy group that's working on it. One thing that came out of these surveys is we asked those employees who preferred to have some type of telework going forward, why? And while safety was one of the main considerations, another consideration, a big consideration for employees, big reason was that they felt more productive working at home. So they cited better productivity working from home and also better work-life balance. They felt more satisfied, they're happier, they're able to get more things done at home. So this is one of those findings and results that we're really going to be exploring as far as how we can incorporate this into the culture going forward in a way that's sustainable and also fair across the workforce. And then that topic of feelings of productivity, we show here that in the survey, 87% of employees felt either similar or more productive compared to working on site, and 40% felt more productive. Feelings of productivity were fairly similar across for supervisors and non-supervisors. Regarding tools, we did ask questions about what internet service providers employees are using. The vast majority of employees who are working from home have been using Google Fiber, Spectrum, and AT&T. And then we also, back in March, asked a question about download speeds. And you can see that the gap there, where while we have around 20% or 25% of employees who have those higher download speeds, there's still some big considerations for employees that have lower download speeds. So 0 to 10 megabits a second. Definitely some needs there that the city's going to have to address. One thing that did come out of this survey is we were able to do kind of a triage. The surveys were not anonymous, and so we were able to connect some of our employees who reported not having internet speeds or having really low speeds with some hotspots. I think we had around 13 to 15 employees that were issued city Wi-Fi hotspots. And then looking at where our employees are working around the city and comparing that to the digital divide as well. So you can see our employees in this section here. We have a number of employees who are still falling on that side of the digital divide with lower access to faster internet speeds.
Yeah. So, Bo, if I could jump back to that slide for a minute, though.
Sure.
That's what we know about the services that are provided, Google, AT&T, and Spectrum. There are faster gigabit speed. Spectrum's 200 megabit speeds are available pretty much citywide. What we find, as it showed in the surveys, it's the affordability gap. So lower income residents of these neighborhoods are the ones that aren't able to afford the internet subscriptions. So what we're seeing in these numbers, it'd be interesting to go back through the data maybe and find out which providers residents in these neighborhoods, employees in these neighborhoods are using. But it was just trying to make the point that it's not the infrastructure is there, it's the cost of the infrastructure. It's that part of the digital divide definition that we need to look at. And I like this slide because it also shows how distributed city employees have been during this remote work program. Rather than being concentrated in offices, we're actually out in neighborhoods now. We're out we are your neighbors, we are your friends and neighbors, and we're working from the neighborhoods now to a large extent. So, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep. Okay, and as we mentioned, those 3 internet service providers, this is taken from the more recent teleworking survey. And these, we found these results were similar to the same question that we asked back in March. Around 60% using Google Fiber, 24% with Spectrum, and 11% AT&T. So that's close to 95% of teleworkers with the city are using those 3 internet service providers. One thing that was surprising here was that 4% of teleworkers are using a Wi-Fi hotspot to work remotely. And that's something that, in my experience using hotspots, it lacks for speed for sure. And that's something that we need to, again, as a city, we'll address with employees going forward, or have to address with employees going forward. And how do we connect them with faster internet speeds, and that hotspot probably can provide. And then teleworkers have high levels of satisfaction with the quality of the internet service providers. This was encouraging to see. We saw around 90% were very satisfied or satisfied with their internet, with their ISPs, with a very low percentage saying they're dissatisfied or disagree. 3% strongly disagreed. And then you can see across internet providers that satisfaction. So it's roughly the same with Google Fiber, Spectrum, and AT&T, those 3 big providers, but you see Google Fiber inching out the other 2 with slightly more very satisfied. And then also with the hotspots, with the city issue, there seems to be less dissatisfaction. The personal hotspots, dissatisfaction was a little bit higher. And then again, it's more encouraging results. This was from our more recent teleworking survey. Almost 70% of our teleworkers felt like they have the resources to do their job effectively while working remotely. About 1 in 4 did not. The resources that people cited needing more weren't so much around internet speeds, but more had to do with some of the hardware, a monitor, using a fast, the laptop, making sure they have a microphone or a headset that works so they can do video conferencing. And then if you'll recall that slide on the area schools, what they're doing, what they're offering for their fall enrollment, this mimics that pretty closely as far as the same considerations our employees have compared to Kansas City area residents. This was taken in early August, so there may have been a little bit of a shift in what schools were planning, but at that time, around 37% were starting remotely or hybrid. 29% we're going to be doing solely on digital learning, so learning from home for the foreseeable future, and then 33% were planning to attend in person full time, with 20% undecided at that time. So with that consideration, there was around 61% of employees that had at least one child that was virtual schooling. So that's been something we've been trying to address in our return to workplace committee, what types of options we can provide for our employees who are parents with children under age of 18 at home. And that's something we're still working with parents with, and trying to find a solution so we can encourage that balance between work and also being able to fulfill those duties as a parent. I speak from experience here, teleworking, working from home, but also having a 2- and 4-year-old at home with me most of the time. And with that, I think we've come close to reaching our time. There's some more resources here. Encourage everybody to check out.
It's Rick Usher.
We have our KC connectivity report, our
right back here though, okay?
Resident satisfaction dashboard, and also the COVID-19 survey dashboard, where a lot of this presentation, these insights were taken from.
All right, thanks, Bo. And I see Steve Chu joined us. Hello, Steve. Steve's the city's Microsoft representative.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, sure. We went through the slides. We had the resident section and then the employees section of this, and we've been recording it as well. So we'll post this for Digital Inclusion Week presentation. Bo, one thing I was impressed with what you had said was that you're showing a 5% increase in internet adoption. So it'd be interesting to, after this anyway, not right now, but go back in and see which income groups that that increase occurred in, maybe what geography of the city that occurred in. That would be, I think that would be interesting. And then I was really impressed with that number of 46% of respondents to the first survey said they were working from home. Right? So, and are those statistically, your surveys are statistically valid, right?
Are we talking about the employee survey?
No, back to the resident survey.
Oh, yeah. So the resident survey, it's around 4,000 residents. We have a margin of error around 1.5 to 2%. But yes, they're demographically representative as well. And the survey is administered by ETC. It's a local company that works with a number of other cities nationally. So we're able to benchmark some of this data with other cities as well. But yes, they are proportionally representative, and they're statistically significant, right. statistically valid.
That's some interesting work. I've booked another meeting, so I got to jump over to another session. But I think Steve, thanks for joining us. Like I say, we'll share this, and I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Bo.
Thanks.
Appreciate the work. Thank you.